been saying in my last session that I moderated, land acknowledgements are never enough, right? And so that's a big catalyst behind this entire conference and this focus on the doing of social justice as inseparable from the talking about it. We've been, yes, so excited to hear from several amazing keynotes, so many amazing presenters who have been reminding us of that. And with that, I'll give a quick intro to Dr. Au, and then this will be very kind of conversational. We have some prepared questions. We're also open to organic questions from the audience as they arise, and just learning from him and the work that he does. So Dr. Au is a former public high school studies teacher, currently a professor in the School of Educational Studies at the University of Washington, Bothell. He is a longtime editor for the social justice teaching magazine, Rethinking Schools, and his work focuses on both academic and public scholarship about high stakes testing, neoliberal education policy, teaching for social justice, critical pedagogy, and anti-racist education. Author, editor of over 100 publications, his recent books include the second edition of Unequal by Design, High Stakes Testing and the Standardization of Inequality, Rethinking Ethnic Studies, co-edited, and Teaching for Black Lives, also co-edited. He was honored with the University of Washington Bothell Distinguished Teaching Award in 2015, presented the William H. Watkins Award for Scholar Activism from the Society of Professors of Education in 2017, and was recognized with the Distinguished K-12 Educational Leader Award from the Evergreen State College MIT program in 2019. So thank you, Dr. Au, for being here. I don't know if there's anything you want to say before we just start jumping into questions.
Yeah, I don't know. Thanks for hosting, Emma, and stepping in for Brandon. I'm sorry he's not feeling well. It's my pleasure to be here and visit with you folks. And since we have such a small group too, like we should just be able to have some discussion or whatever. We didn't really want to do sort of like a typical like whatever sage on the stage sort of a keynote presentation. And so, we set this up more as a conversation and a space for us to, have some conversations and just, feel out, whatever sort of would serve you all in terms of getting, some perspective or some of my perspective on the politics of education and things that are going on right now. So really, I'd say it's really open. We do have like some 10 people sending questions. We can do that, but we're a pretty small group too. So I'm open to whichever you want to do, Emma.
Great. Well, as moderator, I was going to just start going through our list of questions, and I swear I'm just going in order. I know the first person, who happens to be me, but I have a question for you.
Okay.
And we can sort of follow this in whatever directions it goes in. I'm kind of skimming through and seeing some connections among the questions that other people have asked. But something that's been coming up through this conference and a tension that I grapple with as a graduate student and a scholar is how to navigate academia, or even like I call it the game of academia, from within. So like knowing where and in what context to be speaking which language in terms of social justice, even radicalness, like that code switching. So I was just wondering if you could talk about your experiences in academia and also in activism, and how you navigate that tension, if that's something you experience, and just, with administration, with grassroots organizing, critical spaces and more traditional spaces, any words of wisdom or experience you want to share.
Yeah, I think honestly, if we're talking about, being a grad student, right, and going to get your master's and PhD and doing this whole thing, that whole process is grappling with this question, right? Like this is what you are doing as a student. You're being ushered into a new institution, and in every way, shape, and form, a new identity, right? You're becoming quote unquote scholar, whatever that means, whatever baggage you want to put on that, right? But you're moving into like there's all these different shifts in cultural codes and sort of discourse communities and all that stuff. It's like this whole new space, and you're just trying to figure out how you fit. It's just like everything else in the world, really, when you go and do something different and new. And so for me, I feel like that was and is always what I'm trying to do. If you look at the work I did early on, like, one of the first papers I ended up writing and publishing came out of one of my classes because I was trying to sort of sort through It was a piece. It was an early piece on hip hop and education, like before it became a whole big thing. Like that we're going. It was an early piece, but that was because I was just trying to sort of how do I sort of rectify? How do I bring together like that piece of me who was DJ and old school hip hop head, and what does that mean to be that person in the academy, right? And then the same thing with the activist work and doing the teacher activism and like trying to like understand how do you bring that stuff to what you do, especially when we know that the university is no joke, right? It wants to shape you into something else, and you're entering this academia thing, which we all know is can be really bad for folks. It can also be really good, but it can be really bad. And so and in that regard, it's not different than any other aspect of schooling, of mass schooling that we have, right? And kids going into the K-12 school system are experiencing, I think, similar issues, just at a different level. And then for me, then, I worked really hard to be like, okay, this is who I am, this is who I'm going to be, and I'm not going to contradict that. And so all of my work, everything I did was within, like, there was tons of growth, of course, but it was all within like what I knew myself to be. And I just had to figure out how can I articulate that voice and those pieces of me, in the academic community, and sort of stay true to myself. Now there were some things like, obviously doing the dissertation, of course, there are hoops you got to jump, and there's different kind of shape to stuff that you're doing that's specific, that you have to get done to prove to the institution that you can do X, Y, and Z. But even with that, I knew, for instance, I wasn't going to spend all this dough and time and then like do one of those dissertations that was going to, like, I don't know, be bound and sit up on the 10th shelf somewhere in some archive and just be there, right? And not be applicable and have use to the world. And so I just aim myself, everything I do needs to be, for me, from my perspective, like of use to the world, whether it's to the movements or to developing critical consciousness for folks, or and everything I write is like that. And so, a lot of people have asked me in this context, like, well, how do you write so much? I write a lot less now, but I used to write a lot more. And it's because everything was driven by my politics. And I raise that just because I think that's what I recommend folks to bring to, bring that drive and just carry it with you through your grad studies and into your academic career. Cause like, that's what makes you you. And if you can't bring that voice to the world, then you shouldn't you shouldn't have to sort of stifle that piece of yourself to make it in this academic game, right? But it's not that it's so easy. I don't mean to be glib in saying all this. You'll meet resistance, and in all sorts of places. I'm not saying you will in your current program, like at WSU or anything, but because you got great faculty there. But there are gatekeepers everywhere. I was just literally on a dissertation committee where someone was doing autoethnography, and the dissertation chair, like I was like outside, not my institution, I was an outside person helping, and the dissertation chair really wanted like assurances from me that the academic world would be okay with like autoethnography and sort of the quote unquote bias and the political stance of the doc student, right? And I was like, yeah, like this is established, right? But the doc student was like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? My chair is like freaking out on me. So those things around legitimacy are always going to be part of, I guess that's what I'm talking about. There's stuff around legitimacy and folks who don't see the activism or the politics as legitimate, but there's a huge community of folks that do. And so, you'll run into these bumps along the way. Even there was, some folks in my circles when I was going through, they told me to be less radical because they thought fewer people would read my work or be involved with my dissertation, that kind of stuff. But I couldn't do that, right? It wasn't who I was. And then to add on to that, though, what I will say, if you're going to be a critical scholar and do this stuff, right, you always have to know that, you're putting yourself in a space where you're more subject to attack, for one, especially now, but in general, that was still true even when I went through. And then you're always going to be in a space where you kind of need to prove yourself more than the next person. right? And you know, I had people here publicly in Washington State come after me and be in the state of Washington and be like, oh yeah, I've read Dr. Al's work. It's all just politics, it's not real research. And so I had to go back and be like, no, 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 no. You know, here I've published in Harvard Ed Review and Teachers College Record and da da da. I had to play some of that game with them around respectability politics to kind of like be like, look, you can't mess with me. And so yeah, that's like you still got to play that stuff, but you know, it's just, you know, I mean, otherwise, I don't know. Otherwise, what are you doing it for, right? Like, if you can't be true to yourself, like, how do you like, how do you do, you know, like, I don't know, how can you do that? Because I just don't want, you know, the academy it can be soul sucking. It's an institution, just like any other institution. And you gotta, you know, you gotta help save yourself by remaining true to that stuff. Yeah. But it's hard because you can't see it's hard. It's really hard because you don't see yourself in the academy too, right? Like, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just was thinking, just reminded of something, you know, like when I came up, I was trying to figure out like, how do I be in this? And what do I do? And who am I? Right. Like, and I don't see any models. And I remember at the time, you know, I don't agree with him politically on everything. But I remember the first time I saw Jeff Duncan Andrade speak, and I was like, oh, okay, here's like a, you know, a hip hop head from LA, like just doing his thing. At least back in the day, he's kind of, he's a little more, he's a little less, I don't know what to say. He's a little more sort of polished now than he was then, but like incredible speaker, super charismatic, you know, and he'd come out with like his t-shirt and his jeans and his sneakers and his gold chain and just be like, okay, here's who I am. I'm going to talk about all this, you know, academic stuff. And when I first saw Jeff, like whatever, this is, you know, whatever, 10, 15 years ago or whatever, I was like, wow, okay, so you can be that and like go get your PhD and be a professor, right? Like we don't always see each other. And I think that's part of what the PhD process is too, is, and the grad school process is too, is just you're, you know, you're looking around, you're trying to find like, who do you fit with and who are you with and who can you be like? And it helps when you see someone, you can be like, oh, there's that part of me that can live in this. And that's okay, right? It's a big relief, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking in the chat that this is resonating with a lot of people and myself included. I mean, I had a professor who, one of my still friends and professors to this day, who was always saying like, find your people, and like everything changes when you feel like you have a group that recognizes and sees and legitimizes you. Even I do think, you know, that doesn't take away from the difficulty of like being asked to prove yourself over and over in some spaces. But
Yeah.
I figure maybe the way to do this is I like, as moderator, I have questions to throw out, but I also don't want to just cut off like natural conversation. So I'll just wait. And if the pause gets awkward, I'll throw in a new question, but I'll stop and see if anyone else wants to jump in. Are we approaching awkward? I'll throw in another one, which I think is related. And like you mentioned, how now just the pushback from a lot of different directions when we're talking about critical work and critical circles, people who are coming in with very specific connotations of what they think critical even means. So here's a question. This is number 4 in our list. In this era of censorship, backlash against what is perceived as critical race theory in schools, and a constant surveillance of public school teachers' work, how can we guide or support teachers who want to do social justice work in their classrooms but are afraid? And how do we prepare pre-service teachers in such a contemporary moment?
Yeah, and you know, we all know that this is all too real right now. Like this is, you know, I was again, the doc committee I was just telling you about that I was on, like she's actually a teacher in the South in Georgia, and like the stuff they've been going through in Georgia is ridiculous, right? And yeah, just, you know, I know someone else who's Michael Apple's son, you know, Dr. Michael Apple, my advisor, his son is a principal in Iowa, and he's actually like planning on moving to another state because he's like, I don't want to be the guy who's like the principal who has job it is to go surveil my teachers when he's got politics that he knows better, right? And so, the answer to this though is sort of the same answer it always was, though, despite the intense, the heightened fears and the heightened contradiction right now around this stuff, is that is that we we cannot survive this alone. It's the same answer as the first question. You got to find your people, right? We cannot survive this alone. Teacher organizers, folks who are political, understand this, because they know that if they go out and if you're the lone teacher teaching CRT in whatever context, you are going to be set up to be attacked, right? And so I'm always, as I'm in my own teacher ed program and working with my students, we're trying to, raise them to be, good radical social justice teachers too. And so I'm always trying to tell them, I coach them. I'm like, okay, look, first thing you do is, build out your networks. We have a regional Northwest Teaching for Social Justice conference every year. Go to the conference. Go find your people. Go see who's teaching where. Go see, become involved with those groups. Get connected to the union, right? Our teachers unions, like here in Seattle, is generally progressive and has a good left-wing caucus that does a lot of organizing around racial justice and that kind of stuff. Get involved with that group. Go get connected to these networks, because when you I shouldn't be talking in terms of networks. It's not even that's too corporate. But really it's about you got to act in community and solidarity with folks, and finding those people, finding those groups are how you build that strength. So that's one huge piece of it. Another piece of it is relationships with community too, right? If you have good relationships with your parents, then actually they're going to have your back when and if things go down, if shit hits the fan, right? And I believe that's correct. Yeah. Thanks, Becca. And so, if you develop relationships with your parents, with the parents of your students, then when other parents come after you, right, then you have it becomes more of a community battle, and you have folks who are holding you up and giving you strength, and you could say you're in coalition with them as well. The other thing I always also push my students to do, my teacher ed students to do, is to they need to understand their where they're teaching, their institutions. And so first thing, if you say you get a new job, okay, go research that community. What's the history of that community? What's the demographics of that community? How has it shifted across time? What's the politics? What's the cultural politics of the community? Right? Do really understand what major events, what things have shaped who's there, is it gentrified? Is there, whatever, there's all sorts of stuff. Go into that. That's a piece of it. The other thing is that I also tell my students, study your institution, right? Figure out who your allies are, people you need to keep an eye on. Who can you build with in your space? Also take the temperature of your admin. Are they really going to have your back? There's all these things you can do really strategically with institutions. And this isn't just for K-12. This would be true for all of you who are grad students or folks going into university positions or whatever. You got to do the same kind of assessment of the community and your institution when you get there too, right? There's going to be, there's going to be landmines everywhere, right? You don't know when you're going to step on it, and you got to do your best to try and figure those out ahead of time. But doing that kind of sort of study of your institution allows you to be really strategic about about the decisions you make, so that you can keep your job and also do the work that you want to do. And it's sort of trying to trying to maintain that balance for sure. And to be clear, sometimes there's reasons to lose your job. So I don't mean to need to cover your ass 100% of the time. But for your day-to-day work, and if you want to keep that grind going, then you got to understand the institution you're going to be engaged with. And so those are the things that I do. I talk about with my students, and it just comes down to organizing, right? Make sure you're together with people in community, and you're involved with local and national networks. One other thing you can do to survive, and this is true again, whether you're K-12 or in grad school, is actually if you can become sort of a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And what I mean by that is like, I know that, for instance, you know, there are radical teachers who write for Rethinking Schools, because they're published in something that's national, for instance, it gives them a different kind of rep, and the principals sometimes stop looking at them as thorns and start seeing them more as the roses, right? Like they start being like, oh, I can brag on you, right? You've got, you're getting some national attention for whatever, X, Y, and Z. And so if your social justice work can be lifted up and spotlighted in that kind of way, then it can be a way to, that can also be a little bit of a life raft for you, or something to survive bumpy waters, for sure.
I have a question.
Ask a question that kind of builds. Oh wait, no, go ahead, Desiree.
No, you go ahead, Heather, go for it.
Okay, so oh gosh, I lost it a little bit. So I'm thinking, oh, this pushback, right? Okay, so I love all the stuff, all the different, sorry, language is gone from me this week. I just submitted my dissertation, so my brain is a fog. But you've given us all these like different tools to use and stuff about when we're receiving this pushback. And I'm curious about when you receive pushback in the classroom from like an individual student. I just had this happen to me this week, and that's why it's like fresh in my mind and I can't get it out of my head. And while we're going through this conference, and I also had like there was a recent like job interview where they asked me that question, like, what do you do when a student, for instance, you're talking about white privilege and they're like, no, I don't have white privilege. They raise their hand and do it in front of the whole class. So how do you respond to like students in those moments? And it's funny because that conversation I can have, I've had millions of those, but the conversation that came up, I didn't expect it. So that pushback just surprised me and I was not prepared, I realized.
Yeah, they're super hard. I remember back my first teaching gig as a professor was at Cal State Fullerton in Southern California, Orange County. I learned a lot about Orange County and the rise of the modern right and all that stuff when I went there. But I taught multicultural education there, right, in the secondary education program. And there was a relative to the students there, a little bit older white gentleman, clearly a second career, like a person coming back. And he raised his hand in class when we're doing stuff around homophobia and supporting queer students and stuff. And he raised his hand in class and just came out with like pure right-wing evangelical, didn't say anything homophobic, like didn't use any slurs, but like was very homophobic in what he said. Well, he literally said, if you know students are doing a lifestyle that's going to be hazardous to them, why wouldn't you counsel them and push them away from it, right? And this is the context of discussing LGBTQT stuff, right? And I was like, because in teacher ed we have an issue, right? Like it's one thing to have that student in a general class, maybe connected to whatever major. It's a different one to have it in a teacher ed course, because if you think about it, I'm sitting there going, and I wrote a long email to one of my queer scholar teacher ed folks, just ranting. I was like, what do I do? Because, like, can I let this guy be a teacher? Right. And like, it was just blowing my mind at the time. I just didn't know, like, can I let this guy be a teacher? And then as a professor, did I have the power to essentially, sort of litigate which politics should be in the classroom or not? And very, very messy, right? At the time, I didn't handle it well, honestly. But honestly, the rest of the class handled it for me too. Like most of the class was like, what? So there was a different kind of response. I try the thing for me, and this is what makes it hard to be a teacher in general, is that when folks come with that kind of stuff in class, what else can we do but, assume that they are students and they bring what they bring with them, right? And we all have imperfect knowledge of the world anyways, and like all of us do. And what can you do but besides engage with that person and on some degree, right? Now, of course, if they came with like a slur or did some stuff that was going to be aggressive in class, that's a whole other issue around the community and safety of folks. But if someone is going to like honestly bring up some of this stuff, then I think we have to have a commitment to honestly engage with them. Otherwise, I don't know why we're teaching, right? Why we consider ourselves to be educators. Now, it doesn't make it easy. There's nothing easy about that at all. And for us as professors, as teachers, and as educators, it also means us potentially inhabiting whatever trauma comes from that engagement, whether it's our own, right? Or whether it's in that space, these things are triggering to me too. And so like having to sort of own all that as well and be able to do that. The other then really practically though, I have a very pragmatic view about education in many ways. It's not a command and control operation. I mean, you all know that. And so it's not like I could be like, okay, you need to conform to like whatever I'm the boss here, and then you all just need to fall in line, even if you disagree with me. Like we're not doing that. But what I can do is hold students responsible for like understanding the course materials and be able to understand why we're talking about it in this context. And be like, so even if I had a student who's resistant politically, like whatever, I'm not, I may or may not be able to convince them otherwise, but they're in this course, in this program that has a committed set of values and politics, and they can either get that and understand that and earn a grade based on that. And if they don't get it, then they're getting a bad grade because they don't know the stuff from class, right? And so there's that very sort of practical angle to it as well. But we got to have good chops. I mean, you got to be able to take that student in class and potentially like go Freudian on them and start asking them questions and validate like, okay, so white privilege doesn't exist. Okay, then how might you explain X, Y, and Z? Like there's a whole thing there, and it can derail the whole class too. That's a whole, like there's other stuff too, but we have to really be on our stuff to be able to like have that conversation in the moment, potentially just like on the fly, spontaneously, and then take time to process with other folks who might have been upset in the class as well, based on that, because there's a fair number of students who might be like, okay, like that was really upsetting. How can they say that, right? And so, I mean, there's all that mess. There's nothing, to me, the bigger danger now is just more like these folks who are recording professors and then using that to come after them, campus reform and all those Campus Reform Now and all those folks using that to aim at folks and go public with whatever gets said in the classroom space. But yeah, it's so hard. I mean, that's the beauty of teaching though, right? That's what we're trying to do.
No, thank you. I wish like I would have had this conversation with you on Thursday. I would have felt my last few days might have been a lot better. But that was very helpful. And also just your example literally was like what was basically happening in my classroom too. And so I wasn't prepared. And also just that validating that it's triggering, because I think that's part of what was happening too, and me not realizing. Random side note I just want to throw in there. I'm from Southern California and I did my master's at Cal State Fullerton.
Oh, you did? Right on. Yeah. When did you get your master's there?
2013 to 2015.
Okay. So a few years after I left. I left 2010. So right on.
Desiree, did you have? Oh,
Yeah, I guess I noticed that Zen Education Project has teaching for Black Lives study groups and kind of regional conversations, it looks like, that are going on an ongoing basis. I know there's a lot of connections between Zen Education Project and Rethinking Schools. I wondered if you had any insights into that work and if there's ways for us to connect with it, and if you have other ideas about how WSU students and faculty can be connecting, beyond the annual conference, which I think is an absolutely brilliant, event. If there's other ways that we can be connecting routinely and kind of keeping those conversations going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so technically Zen Education Project is sort of the child of Rethinking Schools and Teaching for Change. Although the Zen Education Project is so big that it sort of sits on its own, and many people don't even understand it as being actually deeply connected to Rethinking Schools. And yeah, those study groups actually came out of, we've gotten a couple of grants out of Zen Education Project to actually set those up and then sort of just get them rolling around the country. And so really, I mean, if you want to get more connected to that, I would just reach out to Zen Ed, either maybe Bill Bigelow or Ursula Wolf-Rocca, who I know presented, at this conference earlier, and sort of see what possibilities they have. They were really aimed at K-12 teachers and folks doing study groups that way. And then actually, there's only been a couple, but part of that whole setup was if you did a study group, you would potentially get me or Jesse or Diane to come talk with the group and have some of those conversations too. But the main thing is just like, all this stuff just gets birthed out of, for the most part, like people deciding to have the meeting. That's what I always tell people. Like, sometimes people ask me like, oh, how do you it's less so now, and I'm glad for that because I think we've got more capacity. But a lot of people ask like, well, how do you like get stuff going? How do you do stuff, right? And I'm not saying you're asking that kind of question, Desiree, but there's a piece of it there too for folks who are just out there, and I always tell them, all you gotta do is you just gotta call the meeting and call the next meeting, right? Set up the monthly, Portland, for instance, Portland, Oregon has, a huge Rethinking Schools group and presence, obviously because of Bill Bigelow and Linda Christensen. But honestly, that whole thing grew out of like, they just had like what they call the TGIF, regular meeting group. And they would get together and have teachers come together and they would watch movies and talk about it, or they would study stuff, or they like, and, or they would start, having some speakers come. Like it just grew into this thing. And then up here in Seattle, we just started a regular group, Puget Sound Rethinking Schools, and again, regular meetings and planning a couple events and doing this thing, right? And then eventually that we're like, we should let's make a conference like the one they do in San Francisco, right? And so then we just did the conference, and now we're on our 16th conference and a couple thousand people, right? I mean, it's just, so my answer to everyone saying, well, how do we do a regular presence, is just to say, I'm always just like, just call the meeting, whatever. First Friday of the month, make it worthwhile or interesting to be there or whatever. And like, and have regular meetings, because that's how it's the regularity of it that's where the community builds, and across time, then you start creating the space, and you start creating a new institution, essentially that can help sustain and maintain the work. SoCal, wow! I'm glad I didn't say anything too bad about SoCal. Look at all the SoCal people there.
Yeah, thank you for these thoughts, Dr. Al. I'm just thinking of with my pre-service teachers that I teach, we're next week, actually, or not this week, but next week, we're going to start talking more about just like the socio-political context of like my work. A lot of it's in social emotional learning as the like vehicle into these conversations about social and eco-justice. And like, I think there's so much fear surrounding that of like, what will parents say? What will communities say? So that's all really helpful. And I wanted, before we move on, to circle back to a question. I'm hoping I'm going to pronounce your name right. Is it Radula?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you said this was in reference to saying it helps to be a big fish in a small pond. And they said, does that mean that conformity to the normative idea of success is a precondition for securing a safe space for doing social justice work in classrooms? And I will move that down in the chat so we can all see it.
Yeah. My answer to that would be no. I don't think it's a precondition. But I do think it's, I do think, because we're dealing with institutions and materially they are what they are, right? Then there is some that game playing that can help you survive and navigate that space. But I don't mean to validate, like I'm not telling everyone to like, become sellouts or whatever, or like, becomes like, I'm very clear. I'm a very realist about my institution. And, it's one of the great things, like Gloria Latson-Billings, we were chatting about Gloria Latson-Billings earlier, right? She's always very clear. She's like, the institution will never love you back, right? And so you just got to know that, right? And having a very strategic relationship with the institution can mean at times like, hey, you've presented at this conference, you've written this thing. And so that can give you a little bit of shielding from some attack. And that's just, I think, part of the reality of it, because we're in this, we're in capitalism, we're in this thing that uses different things to legitimize us. But that's not going to necessarily be true in all contexts. That it won't necessarily, and I mean this both ways. Like, you could have whatever publications or whatever kind of legitimacy, and they'll fire your ass anyways, like for all sorts of political reasons. And you can also find spaces where no one cares about any of that, and you've got supportive communities, and you're not engaged in those kind of battles. I was fortunate enough to, when I taught at Berkeley High School for a couple of years down in Berkeley, California. I actually used my networks within Rethinking Schools to actually get myself that job, like find the opening and then network with folks who are connected. But the history department was mixed, but we had like a core of folks that was big in that history department that was committed to similar politics and supportive of each other. And like, we had a really strong community. And so I didn't worry about this other stuff. I worried about it less, at least, and wasn't necessarily playing those kinds of games, because it was Berkeley, and we had enough cultural and political support to do the work we wanted to do without fear of like being attacked or at least not huge attacks. We did get attacked though, in various ways. And this would be just one side note, just to show you the power of parents. So Berkeley High School is over 3,000 students, big. And then one set of conservative parents was upset with stuff, and they, like, for instance, they started pulling down state statutes saying things like, oh, every classroom has to have in California law says every classroom has to have a flag, invisible flag somewhere, right? And so then like everyone's like, oh, we didn't know that, and so now we have to do this. It's state law, and like everyone's scrambling to do that. Or you have to do Pledge of Allegiance or something patriotic each day. That's like in state law. And so then we had one set of parents like messing things up for folks and trying to like rub our faces in our politics, I think, to some degree. But yeah, there I was lucky enough to just have this community, and I wasn't necessarily having to deal with conformity or sort of normative ideas of success to thrive in that space.
I want to jump in too to just think another question that we had pre-prepared, because a lot of what you're saying is making me think of this reciprocity just with communities and with people, whether they're teaching higher ed or K through 12, because I think so often we get caught up, and I use like the global we, like especially I would say like white middle class pre-service teachers, like the primary demographic of like the students that I teach at least. Like it's easy to fall into the saviorist idea of like wanting to save the community and wanting to help the community. And I mean, helping is great, but I think with that reciprocity, that like building these relationships doesn't just have to be from this place of like top down, like saviorism, that they can also be part of your, I'm also thinking network. ERA is coming up, the coalition, I saw Catherine put.
Yeah.
And that's a great question that I saw that someone had asked, which is, let's see, as much of your collaborative work highlights, it's important to reclaim the multicultural history and roots of US curriculum while working in a space like higher education that has been dominated by colonialism, white supremacy, and other oppressive systems. How can we bring in marginalized voices from our communities into these conversations around curriculum? Do you have specific examples of and recommendations for collaborating with our communities?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and it's been more true now than ever, like a lot of the stuff I write and do now, actually like the solidarity work and the work with community comes like I'm not entering in those spaces as someone researching those spaces. I'm just in those spaces, and then I'm writing about it after the fact. And I'm writing about it not out of careerist pursuits, but more out of like, I think there's something important for the world to learn from, and that we can model and use to do even better in other spaces, right? And so and the reason why I'm saying that is sort of an answer to this is just like the organizing work and the community work, those relationships come first, right? I know there's a fair number of researchers who are like, oh, I'm going to research this, and then they go build the relationships based on their research agenda, right? But think about like that's just that. I mean, and you can do that in good, like Lee Patel's work is great around like rethinking a bunch of that stuff, right? You can do that and have really good reciprocal and caring and real relationships with communities. So I don't want to say that's always bad by any means. But I'm just saying, for me, the stuff has started with the relationships first, and everything else was sort of done on top of that. And so I don't even think about I don't even think about in terms of sort of bringing like the question asks, bringing marginalized voices from our communities into conversations of our curriculum, because it's not my job to bring that. Like there's even a little bit of a power thing in how that's framed. But what I can do is be a part of like parent groups who are organizing around that stuff, or parent and teacher groups, or parent teacher organizing groups who are working on that stuff. And I can also bring my PhD to bear to legitimize their demands and their work, right? And I think that's one, like if there's one of the things that folks with degrees can be doing is like lending the weight of that degree to support activist movements and to support the folks who are doing that work. And so actually more lately, you know, I've sort of pulled back from leadership on stuff here, like whether it's the fight for ethnic studies or whatever, like I've sort of pulled myself back a little bit to create space for other folks, also to create space for myself in other parts of my life. But then also I'm still there to like, you know, if folks need to know, like, what's the research say about, you know, X, Y, and Z around curriculum? Okay, here. And I can help them with that, or I can help make presentations or be involved with press conferences, or whatever. Like I can bring that degree in my position as a professor at University of Washington to like bring the weight of that and use that privilege really in very material forms to support the curriculum work that people want to do. So that's really how I've been doing it. But I know other people are doing really great work where they're, you know, they've stopped solo authoring papers and studies. And if they're doing that work, they're like, it's written by everyone involved, right? And that includes students and parents and whoever else has been involved in that work. And so just, you know, really making those relationships really mutual, you sort of really on the ground level and making sure that comes out in the institutional level too, after the fact.
Okay, I'm gonna say awkward length. So I'm looking at our question list again, unless anyone wants to jump in the chat too, or you can DM me. But something I'm curious about, and like this is related, but shifting gears just a little bit, is like the work we're doing around assessment and like around specific ways of teaching. So I had a question about standardized testing, and I'm seeing another one around along these lines as well. But about a year ago, I had a student in my class on an elementary assessment ask me something along the lines of, if standardized tests really aren't serving students well, or are like created in this top-down manner, or are measuring the most, or not measuring the most important skills for their lives, and if researchers and teachers know that, then why do we still use them? Which is always the tough question of like, that is the question of the year. And so in the moment, I turned the question back to my class and actually was excited to hear what they came up with. But maybe shifting into like assessment and even standardized testing, like how would you answer that question?
Yeah, you know, and I got to tell you, I'm super excited because the new edition of my book on testing is coming out in July. That's just currently scheduled. We're in production now. And I'm happy because it's very much a new book in every way, shape, and form. It's got a couple of the same chapters, but everything else is almost rewritten entirely because it's caught up to the times. Because the book is now 13 years old or something like that. And so, like, but this is one of the central questions. This has always been the case, you know, because I think the part of my answer is to say, well, not all researchers and not all teachers know this. Right. There are a huge swath of teachers just in the middle of everything, whose common sense is standardized testing, and that's just sort of what they just sort of know. Not that I would say that they could be argued out of it, I think, and if they had space and time and some critical engagement, they might shift their position on it. But it just has to do with the common sense. Maybe the common sense, though, maybe I'm misjudging, because I feel like common sense has shifted in recent years around standardized testing, and maybe most teachers would critique it. That would be something would be worth empirically sort of playing around with. But there are, there's a whole swath of researchers who just believe in the tests and the data they generate, right? And most of them are not necessarily in teacher education. A whole bunch of them are economists who do research on testing, and they are the ones who came up with like value added, models for teacher evaluation, and the folks who are doing their, multivariate, analyses of test data, because the data drives this whole reform machine. And so, yeah, and then there's the corporations and everyone making money off it on top of that, and we could definitely go there. The book goes there for sure. And so there, but I'm just saying there's a bunch of researchers who just are on board with it. They believe it, and they're really just sort of stuck in this paradigm. They can't see that the paradigm is broken because they're in that fishbowl. They're the fish in that fishbowl, and that's just what they hold true. But more and more testing, whether it's testing or any other education policy, I've just become to believe in the last, in the couple decades of my career at this point, is to say that like education policy, whether it's testing or anything else, none of it's driven by research. It's all driven by politics. Education is education as a political arena is purely driven by like these political struggles that are happening. We see it with CRT or anything with the anti-trans, anti-queer student stuff, like all this stuff. None of it's driven by the research that we have on these things. If it was, we wouldn't be making these policies. It's all about the political game and folks using education for political points in various ways, and to whip up real fervors of people like around the CRT stuff. Like it's all these people who don't know anything about CRT, who, and Emma, I know you're seeing this. If your work's on social emotional learning, they've grouped social emotional learning with the CRT, and you're like, SEL is not CRT. It's not anywhere close to CRT. Like what? Like so like if they knew, that's the thing. It's all predicated on a political sensibility that has nothing to do with the research, and that's been true for testing for decades and decades. And then there's the money on top of that, and then now, if you think about it, it's also there's probably someone doing something on institutional theory that would be useful for us, because now if you think about it, we have literally every district, because of No Child Left Behind, we have every school, every district, every state, and and the feds. Like there are systems and apparatuses that are built around the data and the data generated by the tests. And so there is no incentive to ditch that whole thing. There's people, all these people got their jobs tied into it. I mean, there's like data analysts and all this, like everything, the corporations, like all that stuff. So this infrastructure all exists, and institutions tend to my mind, they tend to move with momentum. And if that infrastructure is already there, there's no incentive for them to ditch it, financial or otherwise. And so, yeah. I wish SEL were more anti-racist. Like there are people that claim.
I know sometimes I hear the claims and I'm like, really? Like I haven't heard of this. That sounds great.
Yeah. And data is not neutral, no doubt.
I know we're getting close to the end of time, but on these lines, there's question 6 and this document that I'm looking at, which is, could you share some examples of how you measure success or familiarity with material in the classroom throughout the semester? What are some more equitable ideas and tools we can use that aren't even like what we could call testing or standardized tests? What else could we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like whenever I'm talking about whenever I'm railing against standardized tests, which is a lot of the time, I'm very clear, like I'm not opposed to assessment, and most educators I know aren't opposed to assessment, right? It's commonsensical, but you kind of got to say it out loud, because when people hear that you're anti-standardized high stakes testing, they think, oh, this person doesn't want to be held accountable, or they don't want to be like measure whatever, I mean, I don't want to be held accountable in those terms. I don't want to use their measuring stick, but I want to know what my students are learning. I want to see how my teaching is going. I want to know all this stuff. And so the first thing I always say is that like teachers are assessing all the time, right? It might be informal and it might be ongoing, informative, like in the moment, but all the observations the teacher is making, every question they're asking the student, it's all assessment all the time. And I'm doing the same thing as a professor. And so part of my answer is to be like, I pay attention to my students. I want to hear what they're saying. I want to hear their conversations. I want to see what they're doing on their weekly, discussion board posts or whatever. And that is me, assessing them regularly. In terms of what I do as a professor, I'm super boring. I do like the occasional big paper, but my grad students freak out on me because they're so they know how to write like this kind of paper. I want a thinking paper. I want a seminar paper with them thinking about the stuff in class. And so I support them, and I'm not I'm not grammar police. I'm not that kind of person, but I do want to see them put together the thoughts in writing, and that's what I do for my major assessment. But I've also loosened up a lot more lately, because I want students to be able to figure out different ways to express themselves. And so, I'm more open. There's more digital stuff with online teaching. I've had to do, shift to more, more digital forms of assessment, whatever kind of, boards or websites people are making for me or whatever, those kind of things. I also want students to teach class and then assess their teaching, right? And so I also regularly in my graduate classes, I'm asking my students to lead seminar, in groups, and then I'll use that as a way I'll assess them in that process. But really what I want for K-12 is I want more of an inquiry-based portfolio system, frankly. I'd be fine with that at all stages, right? I want students to be able to spend a lot of time examining their own work, developing their own meta understandings of what they learn, and then express that to the community, however we want to define that, whether it's their class and the teacher, or maybe it involves parents and other community members. And the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. I want folks to just have a chance to demonstrate what they learned on their own terms and actually have control and some power in how they do that. I think those is probably the fundamental principles for that. The difficulty for the system is that those things aren't easily standardized. They're not efficient, right? You need time and space and resources, and give folks space to think and show you what they're thinking, right? And the biggest problem for the system is that they're not comparable, right? You can't say, oh, student A over here, did better or worse than student B over here, or school A and school B, right? It doesn't lead to comparison. But I don't want it to be comparison. I want students to compare themselves to themselves and show what they learned, right? Yeah. What would we do? Yeah, I know, right?
I'm just going to leave it open if anyone else has questions and thoughts that came up. Do you still DJ?
Here, let me change my back. My room's my space was a little messy, but I still, partly your answer is behind me. I don't have time to DJ though. That's the biggest issue. When I went on sabbatical, the first thing I did was make a new mixtape. So that was.
Who are your own models in education? Who do you look to as kind of your own kind of summary models of who you want to be as an educator, or who inspire you as an educator?
I answer that in a couple different ways. I mean, there's my own teachers who inspired me, right? Craig McGowan was a marine biology teacher here in Seattle, Washington, whose pedagogy was inspiring, his enthusiasm and energy. I love that guy, and I wanted to be a scientist, coming out of high school because of him. And then another one of my high school teachers I hold dear was Gary Davis. I've written about him a little bit. He sort of had a secrets for the Black Studies class at my high school. And I took two classes with 2 semesters with him, and that was a really important experience. less exciting pedagogically, but more about sort of what does the politics of ethnic studies do to consciousness and how we understand the world. And the other, it depends. There's other folks like, folks I've written about, Freire pedagogically, of course, is one of my guiding lights in my life and my work, even though I never met him. And then there's a bunch of people who I just love, like who, I don't even know how they are in the classroom, but in terms of just who they are as scholars and educators, like Dave Stovall, like I love Dave. He's like, if you ever seen him speak, you should go look up the Northwest Teaching for Social Justice keynote we have recorded with Stovall. I show that to my classes. I'm going to show it when my class starts next quarter. It's called Still Troubling the Waters, I think is the title of that talk. He's just an amazing dude. And and his love, his orientation, his connection to community and who he is in person, he's genuine. I also feel that way about Curtis Acosta, famously from the Tucson Mexican American Studies, ethnic studies banning in that program and stuff. I've only seen Curtis teach in K-12 classrooms on TV, on screens. But I've done workshops with Curtis and been engaged with him a lot personally. And he's just like, it's the folks who are real, who bring political consciousness to it, who are relational and like about human relations. Same thing with Farima, Poor Khorshid. She's just amazing like that too. These are just amazing people who I love, who have amazing sense of politics, who are studied, who are scholars, but are also just like in it for the heart. And that's the stuff that I really look for and that I really, really love. Yeah.
That's a great question, Desiree. I'm just enjoying the chat too.
Yeah, me too. As I'm looking at it now.
So I know we're at 4:30 and I wanted to see what our other planning people think about just kind of a way to close out and wrap up, and to thank everyone again for your time, for being here on a Saturday, Dr. Al for taking the hour of your day. It's just been so wonderful the past couple of days to learn from everyone and be inspired. And I was going to take more notes, but I found myself just like really wanting to be present as much as you can be present on a Zoom screen. So yeah, anyone else want to share closing thoughts, questions, remarks?
I'd love if everyone feels comfortable for us to unmute and sort of give Dr. Al a round of applause and just thank him for his time today. And also to thank you, Emma, for doing such a fabulous job of moderating this and making it a really engaging conversation. So if everyone wants to.
Dr. Al.
And we do have just a few minutes, sort of in SJCon tradition, typically kind of a closeout. If you are willing to kind of bear with us here, there's many thank yous that we owe to everyone who has participated. And for folks who were in our conversation earlier about crying, get ready because I'm totally going to cry. I'm already crying and I haven't even started. So, but I do need to give these thank yous to everyone. So yeah, I just want to first say thank you to everyone for being here over the last 2 days in whatever capacity that you joined us. This is, as Emma said, being here on a Saturday is like so much commitment and we thank you sincerely for it. We also know this hasn't been the smoothest technical experience ever. And I do think I'm locked into providing coffee for Robin White for the rest of his life, which I'm very honored and happy to oblige. But this is really the largest scale, fully Zoom version of the conference that we've attempted, and we've learned a ton. And we're just so grateful to you all for your patience and enthusiasm and grace with us during these last 2 days.
Oh, it's not just coffee.
Oh, there you are, Robin. I didn't know if you were going to come back. That's amazing. Yeah, fully locked into whatever Robin wants until the end of time. And I also just want to make sure to acknowledge, just like I said yesterday, that there's nothing that I feel like I can say that needs to be or should be added on to what Keola, Dr. Au, and all of our amazing speakers have already shared with us today. And indeed, it's been 2 very full days of difficult, painful, inspiring, infuriating, uplifting, and ultimately community building topics and discussions. So I don't want to take too much of your time with my words when our speakers have put so much care and love and insight into crafting theirs. But what I do want to say is that there is work to do and that there's plenty to go around. As we stated on Friday and again this morning, our goal in being here is to build coalition, to learn, but then also to do. and that we're really committed to holding ourselves and each other and all of you accountable to living up to our responsibilities to one another. Keola highlighted how far academia is from being a place where all communities, knowledges, and ways of being in the world are respected and really belong. And Kathy Sampson-Cruz told us, and this is a quote, "Be passionate, do something, anything that you can." And she encouraged us by adding that if you throw a dart at a map, you will find someone there who is resisting. And it's really our job now to support those folks who are already engaged in resistance in the ways that they have requested it. And our speakers on the MMIP panel highlighted through devastating personal stories the continued, palpable, and egregious violence of contemporary racism and discrimination. And as Dr. Au just concluded for us today, we will inevitably meet resistance in doing this kind of work and in radically being ourselves in academic spaces, but that it's worth the effort anyway, and that we will find our communities and coalitions if we keep looking, which really resonated with me personally, and I'm sure matched many of your own experiences and kind of internal debates that we've been thinking about for the last 2 days. As he said, there's going to be landmines everywhere, but we can help each other navigate and negotiate them, and have to be brave enough to just call that meeting and get the work started. We've heard from unbelievably talented and conscientious students, scientists, activists, scholars, filmmakers, artists, friends, parents, and family about the work that they're doing and the lived realities that are ultimately the point of the work that we're all doing. So if you're looking for a place to jump in, which I hope you are, members of this coalition have told us where to go and what to do. And I hope that we've all been listening and taking notes as they've been telling us that. We're going to be following up with all of our attendees with a list of resources and ways to be involved or get plugged in. And we ask you to find a place that feels right to you. And as we said yesterday, jump right in. I'm really so humbled and excited when I think about what this team of people could accomplish if and when we join meaningfully and in the long term together. And this is where I'm definitely going to cry. I also have to take a moment to thank by name all of our committee members who worked tirelessly to make this event a reality. And I'm sorry that all of them couldn't be here for this last event. But I'm going to read their names and would like them to identify themselves if they feel comfortable, and just invite everyone here to thank them for all of the work that they've put into it. So our committee members are Angel Bonilla, Brandon Cockburn, Dion Cromarty, Emma McMain, RJ Murphy, Heather Ramos, Anastasia Tucker, and Crystal Woods. And then with special thanks to our 2 faculty mentors who are just amazing and have gone above and beyond. And that's Dr. Ashley Boyd and Dr. Desiree Hilligers. And I'd just love to pause and clap for them and let them know how much we love and appreciate them, because this could not have happened without them. Thank you all. So I just want to, I just want to make sure I say to you all that this is always a labor of love, and I'm just deeply grateful to have been a part of this event that you all worked so hard on. The event really has grown and expanded and become better through each one of you, and I can't adequately thank you. So I hope you'll accept this small attempt to express my gratitude. And then I just want to say thank you again to everyone for being here. We're building a community and many coalitions here together, and it really just wouldn't be possible without every one of you. I've cried out of anguish and gratitude and love multiple times this weekend, and I thank you all for allowing me and every attendee the opportunity to think and feel and learn alongside of you. So thank you all for being here.